The last few messages we've been looking at some of God's clear instructions. So one of the greatest questions we ever ask, what's God's will for my life? And before we can get to understanding that's a really big question, maybe it's good just to start with, well, what are the clear instructions that he has given? And this is another one. And this isn't me saying it. This is not a pastor. This is not a Christian trying to be judgy, but it's literally just watch your words. That's God's clear instruction. And there is so much depth and so much meaning to it. And what I'm hoping in this message is that you will see that this is not the typical type of, well, you mustn't just swear message. It's so much deeper than that. And when we can see that God wants us to guard our words, because it's part of guarding our hearts, because that's where our words ultimately come from. And we have sometimes a bit more control over what we say compared to what we feel. And it's important to have control over that filter, because our words can crush or they can lift up. Our words can wound or they can heal. And we want to make sure we're on the godly part of that. So here's the clear instruction from Ephesians chapter 4, just this one verse, verse 29. And it says, "Let no corrupt word proceed out of your mouth, but what is good for necessary edification, for building up, that it may impart grace to the hearers." Now, I know that my heart is not pure. And I'm not saying that to try and show some humility, because here's the non-humble part. Your heart's not pure either. The scriptures will say that our hearts are filled with deceit and wickedness. And if I'm honest, that's what I often find there. I find impure motives. I find things that I wish weren't there. Now, if that's how I feel, and I know that that's how I feel, I'm super grateful that my feelings are not the deciding factor. I have a choice beyond my heart. I still have a choice that comes before the words come out of my mouth. And that choice is where I can choose, despite how I feel. I can choose that my words are still godly. So the Lord Jesus said, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. And that's really what it is your words are a window to your inner world. It's showing what's going on there. And we want to be careful and mindful about that, because before our words are ever spoken in public, we rehearse them in private. We go through so many iterations. There are so many sentences, so many thoughts, so many things that we allow that are ungodly, until ultimately, yes, it does come out of our mouths. Our inner dialogue really matters, because you cannot build others up if you keep breaking yourself down in your own self-talk. And destructive self-talk is not godly. So how do we ensure that we can move away from that? But before we do that, we first just want to have a look, well, what does it mean to have like a corrupt communication? Like what is that? So when the Apostle Paul wrote that corruptness is like rottenness and decay. That's what it means. Now, that's quite a broad term for words, which is important, because I've had it said to me a couple of times where people have come and it's one of those like typical, I don't know what to call it. It's like people who are trying to prove a point because they know that I'm a pastor or whatever. And they'll come and they'll say, the Bible doesn't say that you're not, I mustn't put an accent on. Sorry. The Bible says that you're not allowed to swear. I mean, it doesn't say you're not allowed to swear. It doesn't give a list of words that you're not allowed to say. And then they'll often say like, modern day swear words were not even swear words back in biblical times. They were only invented much later. And all of that's true, but it just doesn't hold much value, because that's not what the Bible is saying. So yes, you're correct. The Bible doesn't give a list of banned words. But what it does is it goes much deeper than that. And it goes to the heart behind all of your words. So this is not really about whether you use swear words or not. That's not what this message is about. This message is about how thoughtful are you about all of the words that you use? And are those words godly? Do they build up the people around you? Or do you use your words in a destructive way? Because ultimately, you pay a price. And so do the people that you love and care about. And that's a really important thing. And it's so worthwhile following this basic instruction and understanding why God says that. So when we look at that verse that says, let no corrupt communication come out of your mouth, I was recently on a flight, and whilst I was catching the sort of like the transport to the plane in the bus, there were these two young guys standing talking, and it was interesting observing them. I enjoy observing people. And whilst they were talking, it was like mid-20s, bachelors. I could tell by the way that they were dressed. There wasn't a lot of lady influence in their lives. And what they were talking about was such bachelor conversation, literally about the groceries that they buy. And the one guy says, no, he just buys 2-minute noodles. He says his grocery bill's 2,000 Rand a month. And he eats 7 packets of 2-minute noodles. But when I listened carefully, and it's all in Afrikaans, I listened carefully and I was surprised because almost every second or third word was a vloekwoord. They were just these like really bad words, and they weren't using them to emphasize, to exclaim anything, to bring attention to what they were saying. It's just part of how they talk. And I thought, wow, the way that you are speaking gives such insight into your heart because you've normalized that kind of language. And that means that that's normal in your life and in your heart, which shows me part of your stage of life and your maturity and how seriously you take things. And I don't know that they're even aware that their words are showing that much about what they think. And then it made me also think that as believers, as followers of Christ, we've been called to be different. And part of that difference is the words that we choose to use so that others will see, will hear those differences. And what might be normal by worldly standards, well, you're going to feel convicted. And as you grow and mature in your walk with the Lord, things that you used to say and maybe phrases that you used to use or words, you're going to start feeling like, oh, I don't know if I should use that. And that's a beautiful moment. I know it doesn't always feel beautiful, but it's a beautiful moment because that's part of God's conviction. It's part of His Holy Spirit just prompting you and prodding you and saying, let's have a look at that. And is this exactly what you should be doing? So celebrate those moments as part of your maturing in faith. And remember that God is not particularly overly concerned about your vocab. This isn't about if you use a specific swear word or not. Like that's not the benchmark here. We want to look and say, what are our words actually doing? What are the impact of our words? Because the easiest thing to do is to use thoughtless words because they are literally thoughtless. And when you see that, well, then you realize that in a lot of those instances, when I'm being thoughtless, I'm not engaging my brain. I'm just letting my emotions lead. And when I'm allowing my emotions to lead, I end up going down paths that can sometimes be destructive. And I want to highlight 3 areas of corrupt communication that have got nothing to do with swearing, because that really isn't what we're focusing on. And one of those is, and this one's going to hit home for some, and I understand it hit home to me as well, to all of us. It's a universal problem. Gossip. So gossip, you could gossip and not use a single bad word. In fact, you could use beautiful words. But you could actually be breaking down the other person's reputation. And that's what gossip does, is when the person isn't present with you, you destroy them. And we've got to be really careful that by destroying their reputation, we realize what that actually does. Because gossip fractures communities. It tears people apart. That's exactly what Proverbs 16 verse 28 says. It says that a whisperer separates even close friends. So we need to be aware of it and cut it out. The other thing that might not have swear words in it, but it's really not good, is, well, this one might actually have swear words in it, is when we speak with anger. When we allow our anger to be the driving force of our words, because then the purpose of those words is to inflict harm. It's to make sure that the person that I'm speaking to, now the person's not outside of my presence, now they're right in front of me. And I want to ensure that they feel a certain way. I want to harm and cause damage. I want to make sure that they understand how wrong this is. And when we do that, well, that's when we are destroying that relationship. and we are damaging that person. So in Colossians chapter 3, verse 8, Paul writes, and he says that there's certain things that we need to put off. Just throw them away. Don't even let them have any part of your life. And part of that is anger and wrath and malice, wanting ill intent, and filthy language. So it is in there. But those are things that we shouldn't have as part of our lives, because words that are spoken in anger wound deeply. And they leave scars. And it's something that we can avoid by being godly in our communication. And then the final one is when we use our words to manipulate. And again, you want to talk about flowery words. No swear words in this one. Like, this is trying to get the other person to do something that you want them to do, which is probably a little bit against their will. And if you have sort of perfected the art of manipulation, well, then here's a prod. To take a step back and to say, am I using my words because I genuinely want what is best for the other person? Or am I using it to just get what I want? And so I have to be careful that the words that I speak and the words that I use are not trying to steer people against their will, because I'm not giving them the full truth. And that's not loving, because loving seeks the good of others with no strings attached. So we've got to be conscious of that. Now, that verse that we read, let no corrupt communication proceed out of your mouth, that's only the first part. The second part is probably even more important. And the second part says, but rather let your words build up. Let it add value to the people around you so that you can impart grace. That's the higher calling that God is calling us to. Let go of the other stuff. Like, forget that. Let's focus on this. So what does communication that builds up look like? And how do we get to do that? Because honestly, godly, edifying words genuinely require effort and thought. It's not that it just flows naturally. And that's sometimes why we veer away from it. Because it's sort of like, I'm going to have to really think about this. And like, yes, we do. And I'm going to have to put effort in. It's like, yes, because all good things require effort. That's just life. So godly shaped words are words that tell the truth, but in love. Often it's easy to just tell the truth. If you just tell the truth and you just like let it out there and you don't care, that's simple. That's easy. But how do you do that and ensure that it's done in a loving way, that the person receives it in a loving way? That's an art. That takes effort. Godly words are also there not just to inform. It's not just to give information. Godly words are there to impart grace. And when we look at that, it's exactly how God has dealt with us. So God could inform us about everything that we are doing wrong. He literally could, but he doesn't. Instead, he wants to show us that he's still willing to work with us, that he still cares, that despite what we are doing wrong, that he still loves us. So first, it is to have that security and to have that side of the relationship that is emphasized, and then to give the information. So communication is not just about imparting information. It's also about imparting grace. And then godly communication is when we leave a conversation and the others feel built up in the Lord. Like that, imagine that as the goal. Like in your friendship circles and in all of the people that you're communicating with, in your family, your spouse, that they feel stronger in the Lord because of the conversation that you've had. And that doesn't necessarily mean that every single conversation has to be biblical, scriptural, Christian. You can genuinely show love and care and concern and empathy and grace to the other person and make it personal and detailed. And you do that in a loving, caring, godly way, and they are going to feel built up. And so to break down is easy. Breaking down takes minimum effort, minimum time. But to actually be intentional and thoughtful and to build up with our words, I know what that feels like. Like, that is a tremendous amount of effort. And I really want to encourage you, just give it a try. The next time that you're going to speak and you really want to say something and add value and bring meaning, give it maximum thought. And I know that it's going to take effort, but just listen to this proverb. Proverb 15:28 says, "The heart of the righteous studies how to answer." Isn't that beautiful? You talk about maximum effort. And in the opposite, the mouth of the wicked just pours out evil, just lets it flow. So how are we going to live this out? What are the practical things that you can do so that you can start implementing some of these in your life and start exercising more towards this godly communication? The first is the simplest and the most important. It starts with prayer. Because when you can start your communication with the Lord and you can be edified in that communication, built up by Him, well, then it's a whole lot easier to go out and to build others up, if that is your source. And then the second part is to pause before you speak, especially if you feel that your emotions are starting to rise. Just take 3 seconds. That's like, it's long enough, but it's also not too long that it becomes awkward. And in those 3 seconds, you just ask this simple thing. It's a beautiful little prayer. You just say, "Lord, are these words going to build up or break down?" Just ask that. And I'm pretty sure you're going to get an answer to that. You'll know really soon of like, yeah, I don't think that this is godly, just by inviting God into that moment. And then also to guard against gossip. If you find yourself in a moment where you're speaking about somebody, they're not present, and it is breaking down and their reputation is now being bashed, well, then step away. Maybe find other ways of saying, can we talk about something else rather? Should we take this to them? I don't know, whatever you need to do in that moment, but just be aware of that. You want to ask questions when speaking about other people. Not just is this like bashing their reputation, but what is the purpose of this conversation? Is it to restore? Is it to find a resolution about an issue that we really are interested in solving this problem? Because then let's talk about it, but then we're going to have to take it to the person. And that creates a very, very different conversation. And then finally is to check your motives. And this is a difficult one. It's one where you have to be super honest with yourself. And that is to say, why am I asking this? Why am I saying this? What is the motive behind it? Am I genuinely imparting grace? Or am I saying this to just steer them in the direction that I want them to go? So I know that these are small steps, but they are really good. We can start these steps in private, and then they're going to play out in public, which is really beautiful. And part of this, of understanding our words, the book of Proverbs is probably the book that speaks the most about the consequences of our words, of what good words look like, of how our words can really make a difference. And in our email that we send out on a weekly basis, I'm going to do an overview of the book of Proverbs, of all the different things that it says about our words. And I'd really encourage you to subscribe, if you haven't yet, to our Tuesday email and our Thursday devotion. So the details of that is in the description of this video. Or you can go along to our website and there's a join our mailing list section there. But please do that and get it and spend some time in the book of Proverbs and look at what it says about our words. So the big question that we have in the series is, what is God's will for my life? And we can find God's will by following His simple instructions. And the simple instruction that He's giving us in this message is, don't have corrupt communication. Don't let corrupt communication come out of your mouth, but rather that which builds up and which imparts grace to the hearers. And when we can do that, well, then we're going to really be closer to walking in God's will. So start with the first part of that instruction, but don't forget the second part, which is far more important and far more powerful, to use your words to build others up around you in a godly way.